I have a book in my hand called I'm Sorry for My Loss, an urgent examination of reproductive care in America. It is written by Colleen Long, who's a journalist based in Washington, D.C., and Rebecca Little, who is Chicago-based, has written for Chicago Magazine, Crane's Chicago Business, and the Chicago Tribune. Rebecca Little and Colleen Long now join us to talk about this book. Rebecca, Colleen, thank you so very much for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us. Yeah.
I want to actually say the book is the title that remains is I'm Sorry for My Loss, but the way it's printed, it's I'm sorry for my miscarriage, my stillbirth, my abortion, my rights, my grief, and then loss is the word that is settled on. So one thing I want people to understand is while this book talks about reproductive care and abortion, it also talks about so much more. Rebecca, start with that. Give us the A to Z of your new book.
Sure. So Colleen and I grew up together in the south suburbs of Chicago, and we both grew up to be journalists, and we both had late-term pregnancy losses. Oh. And we were, both of us about 10 years ago. And we were really the sounding boards for each other after those losses. And we knew that, we always say this book was sort of born of text messages. And then when we decided to write a book about it, and Colleen can talk about this in a minute. Kyle was covering the Supreme Court for AP, and that was she was listening to the Dobbs arguments. And she called me and she said, you know what, I think we need to write something about this. I think things are about to shift. She was, of course, correct. So we decided we wanted to write a book that wasn't, there's a lot of memoir out there and there's a lot of grief manuals out there. And we wanted a reported look at why America is so bad at pregnancy loss. And something that we wish we had had, kind of like 6 months after, where you look back and you go, wait, why did that happen? And so we kind of looked to do the soup to nuts, the history of how we got here, the language that we use, why it's so inadequate, the medicine, the legality, and the mourning rituals that people have sort of come up with in lieu of a culturally prescribed script for them. So
you're absolutely right. We don't have a way, particularly late-term miscarriages. We don't have a culturally accepted way to grieve. Do you have a funeral? Is it just, I remember a couple of, I don't know, time is very fluid in my life, probably a couple, 3 years ago, when Chrissy Teigen, John Legend's wife, very, very publicly had a late-term miscarriage. And she went public with it. I mean, you saw pictures of her, after she'd lost the baby. You saw pictures of her and John cuddling their wrapped up baby Jack, who would never be born. And for a lot of people, that was like eye-opening, like this happens. It was just astounding to me that people were blown away that this is something that happens when it happens all the time.
Yeah, I think part of the problem we uncovered when we were doing reporting, and also we sort of felt it when we were living through it, is that, what's happening in our society now is everything that isn't a perfect pregnancy or like ending an unwanted pregnancy, everything in the middle, and there's a really big middle, it just gets sort of swept under the rug. And it gets swept under the rug for a lot of reasons, politics on both sides, grief, anxiousness, paternalistic ideas around women in healthcare. There's a lot of reasons. And we thought it would be good. We thought in order to illuminate why we are so bad at pregnancy loss in America, we had to sort of reline everything under one spectrum, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And one of the things you guys talk about is not only are there no culturally accepted rituals for how we deal with this and how we deal with these losses, the terminology, it doesn't seem to even be adequate. Talk about that, if you would, Colleen.
Sure, yeah. There are no words. I mean, even from the get-go, there's only when we're pregnant, we really only have the word baby to sort of default to, and that is natural for most people because, you know, they're looking forward to it, but it's really like hitting on an emotional register more than it is on like a medical or a clinical register. And it matters because what's happened over the past 50 years or so is, you know, we've really put such a premium on this idea of perfect pregnancy, and we're bonding so much earlier with, you know, the baby, and we know we're pregnant the minute the shirt turns pink, and we're getting sonograms, 3D sonograms, and all these things. But then when it doesn't work out, you know, there's a lot of silence, and there's a lot of sort of, I don't know, it's just like, move on, try to have another, you'll be fine, you know, a lot of words like that. So, yeah, even the words kind of fail us. And there's a lot of clinical words, you know, and most of the clinical words are kind of not great, like lazy ovary. Rebecca, what's another one? I can't make off the top of my head now.
Incompetent cervix.
Right, incompetent cervix. I mean, you know, it's just like, there's a lot of sort of weirdly blamey words that go along with medicine. And, you know, when we were doing research for this book, we sort of took a long lens on that and discovered, unsurprisingly, that, you know, medical language is sort of really rooted in sexism. It goes back a long time, all the way back to hysteria.
Yeah, when a couple is infertile and it turns out it's the guy's fault, do we say it's an incompetent penis?
Nope.
No.
It is.
No. And actually, we found in our research that a lot of people, you know, when it was the partner, when it was the man who was struggling with some type of infertility, they were treated with, like, pretty careful kid gloves. When it was the woman, it was a different story, which, you know, I got into a lot.
Well, you know, that's reflected on page, I don't know if you have the book in front of you, but on page 143, I made note of, you reference some of these studies that looked at gender differences in clinical trials. Part of the reason this stood out to me is last week there was, I didn't get to put it on the air this week, but there was a big, you could get interviews with national doctors to talk about the fact that heart disease is a huge killer of women, and a woman's heart attack symptoms are very, very different from a man. And I was reading through all the data, and it said that the authors found that in as many as 30% of cases where women were reporting heart attack symptoms, they were told it was mental illness. Can you believe it?
Yes, I can.
I can believe it. Yes, I can.
So talk about this, what you reported here. What chapter is this? Medical mystery chapter.
Yeah. So that chapter was born because we couldn't figure out why, in some cases, everybody was saying, "Oh, well, that just happens. We have no idea." I have Crohn's disease, and so when I was pregnant, I was like, "Oh, should I take medicine? Should I take the medicine that I've been prescribed for Crohn's disease?" And my doctors were like, "Yeah, I don't know. I mean, who knows? There's no tests. Like, there's some mice tests, but there's no human test. We just don't know." And so I started thinking, like, geez, I wonder why we don't know this. And then I came to discover that it isn't that we don't know, it's that we're not asking the questions at all. So what we found is that, you know, it was in the mid-90s that women were, that it was Congress mandated that women be used in clinical studies for biomedical research. And, you know, biomedical research is necessary for everything. It determines, as you say, heart conditions, the medical instruments we use in everyday doctor's visits, medication, all kinds of stuff. And up until the 90s, it wasn't even a requirement for women to be tested. And so now what we see is that, yes, women are being tested more. That's true. But their distinction as a woman, or like their genetic distinctions, are not being held. They're not being treated differently. So now it's sort of like all the data is getting lumped together. But they're not examining the differences that may or may not exist between men and women. That's still lagging. There was a study recently about this that I just mentioned not that long ago, actually, maybe just a couple months ago. So it's like we're getting a little bit better, but not great. And when it comes in, when you add in pregnancy, there are a lot of really understandable concerns for women and for their babies because, you don't want to be giving a woman something that could harm their baby. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, a lot of the doctors we interviewed for those particular chapters told us that there's a lot of sort of like non-controversial ways in which you could measure how medicine affects women and babies. One example would be I took the Crohn's medicine when I was pregnant. You could have taken notes of what happened when I took the regular medicine. That's kind of just a simple example.
Wow. Guys, we need to take a break. I'm talking with Rebecca Little and Colleen Long. Their book is actually the full title, I'm Sorry for My Miscarriage, Stillbirth, Abortion, Rights, Grief, Loss. We'll be right back after this.
Don't turn that dial. Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive, returns right now.
A fair balance where the facts come out.
On WCPT 820.
I am joined by Rebecca Little and Colleen Long. They both suffered late-term abortions and late-term miscarriages. Spontaneous abortion is what the medical profession calls it, another bad term. They both suffered late-term miscarriages. They supported one another through it, and they realized that there was really a dearth of information about all of this. And so they wrote this book, I'm Sorry for My Miscarriage, Stillbirth, Abortion, Rights, Grief, Loss. I want to skip ahead to, let's see, what this chapter is called Mourning Rituals, and it's under postpartum care. One of the things that you talk about is the fact that because there are no accepted, when somebody dies, are we going to cremate them, or is there going to be a casket? Is there going to be a memorial service? We sort of know what to do, what is expected of us. But when somebody loses a late-term baby, there is no guideline. And here's one of the things you say that I love, that when somebody is telling a family who's experiencing this what their options are, that they need to repeat that information. For anybody who's ever had a medical shock, I can tell you, I was a medical reporter, and I was talking to a doctor, and I'm like, oh, my God, I'm going to remember every word. And I would walk away, and I would go, I have no idea what was just said to me. No idea whatsoever. There's a certain kind of way that your brain protects itself by not hearing anything. And, parents need to be encouraged to mourn. Whatever, and you talk about some ways that parents can say goodbye. Would you talk about that, please? Rebecca, you want to start?
Sure. So, one of the things, we had talked to people that were religious, that weren't religious, and pretty much across the board, everyone really felt like they had no idea what they were supposed to do. And like you said, we don't culturally or even religiously have this happens to you, and you're like, now what do I do? So what people kind of did that they wish, like some of the doctors and nurses were really good about being like, do you want to hold the baby? Then maybe waiting an hour and be like, when the baby's born, do you want to hold the baby? Just to keep checking in because they knew that you were not registering. And one of the things that we did have people regret, and this one mother had told us, she said, nobody asked me if I wanted to hold the baby or wanted to have them take pictures. The doctor said, we asked you a couple times. And she had no memory of it. Now, they luckily had taken photos, so she was able to get that. And the thing that a lot of people said, too, was like, do the thing, because then at least you have it. You don't ever have to look at those pictures, but at least somebody took them. You have them. And, I have pictures. I've never looked at them. They're in my closet. I may never look at them, but I'm happy that I have them because I can't recreate that moment. And, get it to go bag, whatever you have in these little totems, because it's really hard with an intangible loss. You don't even really have a memory. There's nothing to hold on to. So if you have maybe a blanket, a hat, a little hospital band, just anything that you can be like, okay, this actually happened. Yeah. And the other thing, too, is, and there are some hospitals are better at this than others, it's a provider thing that it's not across the board. Just that this actually happened. We are going to check in on you. We are going to offer you services. If it's a grief group, or just here's somewhere you can go for extra help, and not be like, okay, we'll see you later. You can go have another, which just doesn't work and didn't work. You know, when we had a service for my stillbirth, the deacon at that service said, I know this is really hard, but you're going to be glad you did this, because he would do like end of life visits in nursing homes. And he said, I would talk to women who lost a baby in their 20s and they're 90, and that's what they're talking about on their deathbed is, what, I never got to hold that baby. So that system didn't work. Yeah, I mean, heartbreaking. And so we're getting better, but it's very variable depending on if you live in a big city, if you're in a, you know, bigger hospital, like in rural hospitals, the nurses are sometimes knitting little outfits on their own. There's not a system of care. Yeah, I know, sweet.
You know, Colleen, some of the women I've spoken to, I had a miscarriage, but it was very early on. Some of the women I've in my circle who've had later miscarriages, one complaint is that they feel like that pregnancy, that child, is erased by the rest of the world. Exactly, sort of like this whole, you know, you can go have another. Like somehow what they just went through and the little person who didn't quite finish but who was there, it's like they never, it's like nobody wants to talk about it. It's like they didn't exist, and they have found that to be just crushing.
Yeah, I think that, you know, it's really hard for people to understand what it's like. I think, generally speaking, it's really hard for people to understand another person's grief, try though they might, right? You know, you don't really understand how horrible it is when you lose somebody in your family until it happens to you. And I think in this case, you know, that's part of the problem. I think the other part of the problem is that, again, we're so conditioned to believe that everything is going to be perfect. So, you know, when something goes wrong, we don't know where to turn because everyone around us is insisting on this idea of positivity and this idea that everything is going to be perfect. A lot of the people we spoke to said very simply, if someone could just say, how are you doing? I thought about you today. I thought about your baby today. I'm so sorry for you. I mean, it doesn't have to be, I think this is maybe something that is really worth noting. It doesn't have to be so substantial. It can be a very small gesture, really small. And that goes a long way for people. I had people in my family who never even mentioned it. You know, I was like 6.5 months pregnant, you know, and then it was like I went from being 6.5 months pregnant to being not pregnant at all. And, you know, I have members of my family who just like literally never mentioned it again. And I think because they felt, you know, that they couldn't or they didn't know what to say. But I do think that a good thing to try is just like, how are you doing? Are you feeling okay? And notice, you know, another thing somebody mentioned to me was set a calendar reminder in 3 months. Like put in your Apple calendar in 3 months. Check on X friend. Just check on her, see how she's doing. And as I say, it can be so simple, and it just really goes a long way.
Rebecca, what was something that was said to you that made you feel better, that made you feel less in pain? What were the good things? Who handled it well, and how did they handle it?
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, I think the best thing somebody did for me after I had what's called TFMR. It's a termination for medical reasons of terminally ill twins at 23 weeks, 5 days, because I had to be under the 24-week limit in Illinois. And it took that long because we were kept hoping they were going to recover. There was going to be something that could save them, which is, I think, something people don't quite understand about these later losses, that you get a lot of information at that 20-week appointment, and then you really have 4 weeks to sort of figure out, like, can they live? Is there anything we can do? And it was a terrible, terrible delivery. It went really badly, and then I ended up having a uterine hemorrhage. I lost my uterus, so I lost the twins and everything but one ovary, who's still kicking around and doing her best. But so in addition to losing the babies, I couldn't really walk. My mom had to move in, so I had a physical recovery that took 6 to 8 weeks.
Oh my God.
Yes, it was. So, and my kids were 5 and 3. They were so confused, and it was right before Christmas. So I kept trying to just to give them something but I would it took me 10 minutes to get up to go to the bathroom. I was not a ton of fun. So my friend would come. She came about twice a week. She would text me and she'd say, I'm going to take the boys from 11 to 2. I'm going to take them to a trampoline place. I'm going to feed them, and then we'll come back. And it was incredible because I knew exactly how long they were going to be gone. So if I needed to cry, if I needed to space out or just be sad, then I knew when I had to gather myself back up. And they then got to get out of the house. They got to have some fun. And she brought some food. She just was very consistent about I'm going to help you with the kids. I'm going to do this specific thing. I'm not going to say to you, what do you need? Because I don't know that I would have had an answer. I don't know what I need. And then she said, if there's anything that, when you're ready to talk about it, I'm ready to listen, which was right because I was not ready at that time. And so I'm so grateful to her because I wouldn't have been able to articulate that I needed that, but she did everything that I needed.
Wow. How did they know what to do? Is this something they're just one of those empathetic people? Had they been through something similar before? Because that's one thing that I've learned over time is that if you just say, how can I help, that frequently that's overwhelming. Even if somebody needs help, just trying to figure out what role you're going to have. So I always try to say something specific, hey, tomorrow night, could I drop off dinner? Tomorrow evening, would that be okay? And then they can either say, oh, thanks, we're covered, but it's this, just asking a generic, how can I help, is often burdensome, I've found.
Yeah. And I think it makes the person who's offering feel better without actually doing anything that's helpful. And it kind of puts the burden back on the grieving person to come up with a list. It's the emotional labor of grieving or something. But yeah, no, I don't. I think I think she'd recently had a parent die. And so she just sort of, I think, was in that space where she was this is what was helpful to me. But it really made a difference.
Colleen, you want to add something that somebody did for you or said to you that was particularly helpful?
I think, so for me, it was, as I say, there was a lot of this didn't happen, and I had to sort of go on I don't know, nothing had happened. It was really strange. But I had one friend who would just, as I say, every now and again, she'd just call me and say, how are you feeling? How are you doing? Around the time that this happened, the following year, everybody kind of forgot about it except for her. I don't know what possessed her to somebody who remembered, but she would say, she called me on the phone and was like, do you want to go get lunch tomorrow? How are you feeling? And it was just so nice. I felt a real burden. Again, it's what Rebecca was talking about. There's this intangible loss. You're the only one who knew what was happening. The baby was inside of you, right? And it's sort of a weird feeling because you feel grief and sad, but other people don't really understand. And so for her to even just acknowledge the existence, that I was actually having a baby, that this was true, and I, was missing the baby, it was really something.
Wow. You guys have written a heck of a book. Again, it's called I'm Sorry for My Loss, An Urgent Examination of Reproductive Care in America, by Colleen Long and Rebecca Little, who not only knew what to write because of their research, but they knew what to write because of what they lived. And it isn't just a book about abortion. It is a book about all aspects of pregnancy and what a woman goes through. I think it is a terrific book, and I really want to thank both of you guys for talking with me and with my audience about it.
Oh, thank you so much for having us.
Yes, thank you very much.